Thanks for checking out my video. If you want to learn more from me, I have a lot of classes on Udemy. You can find the links to a lot of those in the description.
Alrighty, so this is probably going to be long and convoluted, so buckle up. But what I wanted to talk about today, because I always do a ton of different research into a lot of theological concepts, is the idea of the Elohim. And you're like, okay, I've heard that word in mainstream religions and stuff, but go on. Okay, I will. So Elohim is, from what I understand, at least in the moment and whatnot, is plural in nature, right? If you wanted to dive way deep into this, he's passed away now, but if you check out Dr. Michael Heiser, I've learned a ton from him about theology and the nature of divinity and whatnot. And so think of it this way. In the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis, let us make man in our image. Is God talking to himself? No. Let us make man in our image. So he's talking to the other gods that are out there. So according to the thoughts of Michael Heiser and whatnot, Yahweh, or we can say God here, is the top of the food chain as far as the class of Elohim go. And so he has the idea of making humans. If you go with the Sumerian account, they're made to do a bunch of work because the lower class of spirits, the Watchers, they didn't like doing all the work and they got tired and they went to the gods, the Elohim, and they were like, hey, can we have somebody else do this for us? And then, depending on the myth and stuff, Enki plays around with some genetics and whatnot, and his wife, and she births the first humans and whatnot. But I might be getting off track here. Like I said, buckle up if you haven't. Grab a coffee too. So the idea is that God is one of many gods. That's why it's thou shalt not have any other gods before me. Why wouldn't you just say in like one of those commandments or whatever, I am the only God? He says, thou shalt not have any other gods before me. That means put him first among the other ones. I think it's somewhere else in the Bible it talks about like the council of gods or something like that. But of course they overlook that for monotheism. So now, along with that, we can look at the Tower of Babel incident, where humans wanted to reach the gods by getting very, very, very high up. Of course, with the tower. And God and the other Elohim were like, oh, that's a bad idea. And so God says, hey, let's confuse them and give them all each languages and spread them out, right? So spread them out to the different corners of the earth, which would explain all the different populations of people and the different, cultures and things like that, because they were all spread out. If you follow Zecharia Sitchin with the idea of how when the Sumerians came to Earth and they started working and making humans and having them mine for gold and what have you, then the idea is that they started off at Adin, which is E period D-I-N, and eventually what they decided to do was spread their area of operations apart and give each different area over to a particular Dingir, a particular deity. So one area belonged to Enki, another area belonged to Enlil, another area belonged to Inanna, another area belonged to Ningizida, so on and so forth. So that follows this idea of the Tower of Babel with splitting everybody apart, and how you have these different cultures and whatnot pop up. And according to Dr. Michael Heiser at that time, the different Elohim were then put in charge of the different areas of where these different societies and whatnot, which would explain why you have a particular group of people worshiping this kind of god over here and a different group of people worshiping this kind of god over here. And then later on, when you have, the rise of Israel, Palestine, whatever you want to call it, you guys get the idea. when the Jews came in there and they sacked the place and they took it over, that's when God was like, all right, enough of this stuff. I want to be the boss again. So all the other Elohim back off because I declare my supreme rulership over the earth. Right? So it's interesting how Dr. Michael Heiser's stuff with explaining these different cultures and why they ended up worshiping these different entities and deities lines up with Zecharia Sitchin's idea of, or what he espouses in his books, which I haven't read in a while, but I have like 2 of them, of how different areas were carved up and given over to different Dingir. Interestingly enough, according to him, Ningizida, who you might know if you've read The Descent of Inanna, is the guardian of the gates of the underworld. Interestingly enough, according to him, he went all the way over to South America. And Ningizida is like a serpent-like being. And who do we have over in South America? We have Quetzalcoatl, who is what? A giant serpent. Coincidence? I think not. The more that you dive into all of these different things with all of these different cultures and everything that they say about different religious beliefs and whatnot, when you start to piece all of these things together, they start to make more and more and more and more and more sense, with leading back to the earliest written record that we have, which is Mesopotamian, Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and what have you. So that's why I leaned so heavily on this stuff, and what helped me find the Simon Necronomicon in the first place was my desire to go as far back as I could with theology and spirituality and whatnot. Now, Dr. Michael Heiser has a ton of other talks and ideas about, the original, like, Genesis and the creation myth and whatnot, and reading it from the actual context at which it was written, because remember, it was written in ancient Hebrew, which is poetic in nature, and how the modern interpretation of the Old Testament and New Testament is garbage compared to what it actually should have been, which is why he espouses the idea of the Elohim being multiple gods. I mean, even in the Old Testament, we got to keep them from, they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If they eat from the tree of life, they will become immortal like us. Who's God talking to, right? Think about it. And, I'm probably going to make another video on the nature of gods and goddesses and what have you, because I have that in my notes. I don't know if I'm going to make it today. But the big idea that I'm trying to get at is the class of gods and goddesses. You can all lump them together with, like, I guess you could call it like a unified theory of gods and goddesses all being from one class, and one of them declaring themselves supreme over the other ones. I mean, you see this a lot in other myths, like take the Enuma Elish, right? Marduk declares himself to be, in some versions it's Marduk, in earlier versions it's Enlil, and what have you, and this changes based on the culture it was written for. Like Babylon, of course, they're going to say Marduk, but earlier versions it's Enki, earlier versions it's Enlil, from the culture saying, hey, our guy is the big boss guy, right? So these things change from culture to culture, which is why religion is heavily based on culture, and then vice versa. But you have the idea that God declared himself to be above everyone else and for everyone else to follow suit. I mean, Yahweh originally started off as a Canaanite storm god, and then he rose to this super prominent level. Even if you look at, there's tons of parallels between Enlil and Yahweh. So are they one and the same? I'm not sure, but I know that Enlil was seen at the top and in Mesopotamia at one point. And then when Babylon rose to power, that's why Marduk got 50 names, because Enlil's number is 50. Marduk's number is not 50, but he took the throne from Enlil and was granted Enlil's 5th number, right? Which is why he got 50 names, which is where we get the 50 names of Marduk from the Enuma Elish, the Necronomicon spellbook, my book, The Powers of Marduk. You can find that in the link tree down below, by the way. So when you start piecing all of these things together, it makes more and more sense, and it leans more towards the idea of a polytheistic view of the cosmos, a polytheistic view of the universe. Now, as far as the nature of these beings, are they mortal like us? That's up for debate, but I'm probably going to get into that in another video that I'm going to make. So let me know what you think about this rambling, and, whether you agree with it, disagree with it, or if you got any more questions. But give this video a like if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't. Until next time, good hunting.